your flesh and blood.
Welcome to Tell Me Your Story. New paradigms for a new world where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here 9 times a week. Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com. We are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, as well as YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope that you will take time to subscribe and click notifications so that when a new conversation is posted, you'll be notified and you'll be able to tune in, listen in, and learn, be entertained and inspired. A reminder that Choices, which is my book, 5 Steps for Life, it's available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle with Audible, soon to be released. We also ask that if you can support the work that we are doing financially, we do have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And when they ask for an email address to whom you're sending, please go to richard@richarddugan.com. That's the email address. If you go to richarddugan.com, there is also a link directly to PayPal so that you can send us whatever support you can. And we thank you to those who have helped and to those who will help. We also ask that you take time during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. And with that, we now take you to our very special interview and guest here on Tell Me Your Story. And welcome to Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host. I kind of go by occasionally Reverend Dr. D. That's right. Occasionally I do go by that moniker. And I found out a few years back that I had just celebrated my 10th anniversary as a Reverend and had completely forgotten that I had done that, folks. And that's kind of what we do sometimes when we get overburdened, overstressed. And you're wondering, why is he going on about this? Well, because it ties into what we're going to talk about with our very special guest today, Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith, and she's going to talk to us about the latest work that she has put out, Sacred Rest. Recover your life, renew your energy, and restore your sanity. Dr. Saundra, thank you so much for joining us here on the program. It's a pleasure to talk about this, especially as we have just entered a brand new year.
Yes, thanks so much for having me.
Why this subject? And I guess maybe I should ask about your specialty. What area, or is it a PhD kind of doctor? You're not an MD. So why this subject in this context?
Actually, I am an MD. I'm a board-certified internal medicine physician in clinical practice for over 20 years. I do both hospital-based, ER, ICU, and clinic-based medicine. And I burned out is the simple answer to that. So I live in a town that's small enough that when I started practicing, we didn't have hospitalists. Nowadays, things are kind of split out. You're either in the hospital or in the office. Well, when I started, that wasn't a thing. You did all of it. And so I was, working 50, 60-hour weeks at a time. And when we had children, that was the last straw, so to speak. I burned out and had no desire to stop practicing medicine and had to figure out a way how to be sustainable within it.
Well, I know that for most all of us, and there was a point in time when I thought I was immune, from all of this stuff that's going on. Because I remember as a kid growing up, I saw through the marketing industry and what they were doing. I hadn't had any education in it. I just could see what game they were playing. And says, I'm not going to play the game. I'm not going to buy into buying everything they tell me I'm supposed to buy. For the most part, I would say that I've been fairly successful. Unfortunately, not everybody's as fortunate as I was to pick up on that. And they get busy and they've got families and they've got work. And I mean, I could sit here and I could list for you 4 or 5 or 6 things that are stressors in my life. And I'm sure that you and everyone else could too. And that's not good, because in addition to sapping our energy to do the things that we'd really like to do, it hurts us physically let alone mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Talk to us about when you think this level of stress came about, if you will, or busyness or what have you. And when we started losing that, as you just described in your title, that sacred rest.
Yeah, I think right now we are in a culture that burnout is the norm. You ask people how are they doing, most people will say, "Oh, I'm exhausted. I'm so busy." And it's said in such a way that it's like, "Oh, well, it's okay that everybody is." As far as when this transition occurred, we started to see a lot more of it when we started seeing a rise in computers and technology and the access to computers. When you think about it 20 years ago, you weren't hearing very much about burnout, even though there were computers available then. When it became more of a like right now, if you ask someone where their phone is, they don't usually have to think about it. It's literally on them 24/7. So our devices and electronics have become just integrated within every minute of our lives. And I feel like this inability to detach from work, detach from relationships, detach from just the noise in our world and the all the sensory inputs, that is a lot of what's adding to our chronic rest deficits. That's a lot of what's adding to this chronic fatigue syndrome and these chronic stressors that people are experiencing. And I also feel like it's a big reason why in my profession we're seeing a rise in everything from high blood pressure, heart attack, diabetes, metabolic syndrome. All of these things that have a cortisol response to them have a lot to do with our stress responses.
Mm. And this is not something that is really new because we've had down through human history all kinds of stressors. They've been different, granted, but people did not suffer, as far as I know. And again, I haven't researched this in depth, going back to medieval times or turn of the millennia, or in the BC era or prehistoric times, as to the conditions, the ailments, the diseases. I don't know if they had cancer back then or if they called it something else, you know. But one of the real interesting statistics, and one of the conditions you brought up, one of the statistics that I heard just recently is that in, I believe it was 1960, we had a 1% obesity rate in the United States, just in the United States. And in 2020, or at least the 2020s, it's now up, and it may be higher than this. You may have more current stats. It was over 41%, and it may be higher than that. And we see, I'm sure you've seen some of the documentaries or some of the news stories where they'll pan a crowd, like let's say New York City sidewalks. They're not looking at anyone in particular, but they're just looking at the people at large, and the number of what are perceived to be overweight people. And I know there's the concern. There are those who don't be fat shaming. This is not about fat shaming. This is about. Did you ever see the television series This Is Us? And
Yes.
the one young gal who has a marvelous voice, absolutely incredible, and yet she is very large. I'm not saying this because she's overweight. I'm saying this because she has a beautiful voice, and I would hate to lose her and miss out on what she would bring us in the years to come by not dropping some of that weight and the stresses on the physical body. That's an interesting dynamic that we'll talk about here, because I think that it's something that needs to be discussed, is the way in which we can talk to someone about not specifically their physical condition. People look at my face, they look at my eyes. My right eye is fine. I can see out of that one. My left eye is almost a light brown, and it's because I have glaucoma. I don't see out of that eye, and the pressure has dropped. But the eye, if you will, is fine other than that. And so they will ask me about it, and I'll tell them. No big deal. I have two missing teeth, but I'm still doing the things I'm doing. I'm able to communicate. I'm able to accomplish things. But how do we get through to someone in a kind and respectful way to say, look, we'd like to have you around for years to come. Could you do something to help that to manifest? Um, can you talk to that particular aspect right now, and then we'll get into some other areas as well.
Yeah, I hear this a lot, particularly when, let's say, one spouse wants to help another spouse to lose weight, and they're for the exact reasons that you're saying, or someone says this about their child or their parent. And it's not that they're being malicious, it's that they generally care about the person and want to make sure that they are there for years to come. And what I'm finding is if you bring it up as just the weight, people who are overweight know they're overweight. They don't need anyone telling them that. What I
True.
find is most of the time they have tried things and they didn't work. There's a lot of shame attached to it. And so there's this fear about failing again. And sometimes that keeps people from going into it for another time. And sometimes truly are underlying medical things that are adding to it. Right now there's this huge rise of, we call it the rise of the peptides in medicine, but it's all the GLP-1s and all the different weight loss shots that you take once a week, and all of these different things that have come out. And I think the big part of that, not that everybody needs that necessarily, but the big part of that people are discussing is that there are underlying reasons sometimes where people have struggled with weight. And so so when you're approaching someone about it, I think we have to make sure that we're approaching from a way where we are not adding to the shame that they experience, coming alongside of them. So, for example, I have to sometimes tell this to spouses when they're like, "Oh, I'm cooking dinner for everybody at my house, but I made like a salad for my husband." It's like, no, that's not going to fly. You're isolating them. You're making them feel like some weird science project that they have to eat the lettuce and everybody else gets to eat the hamburger. It's like if you're going to do that, be a part of the journey with them. Everybody's having a salad for dinner, or everybody's having whatever it is that you decide to come up with that's you feel is a healthier option. Or you invite the family's going to go for a walk, or you invite your spouse, hey, let's go walk around the park. And so you become part of the journey. So it becomes more of a love experience than just this science experience. Let me help this person lose weight.
Mm. There was a time a few years back. I think I'm 5'9", some 5'8", 5'9", something like that. I also know too that as I get older, I'm going to shrink, kind of like my dad did. I was really shocked too because he was a tall, thin kind of guy, but still. And as I got older, he got shorter, and and I could see over the top of his head sometimes. Um, but there was a time when I actually reached the weight of 200 pounds. Now, the weight itself, which wasn't good for me because it did a number on my knees, uh, the psychological aspects of that number, I would say, no, that's not me. I am not 200 pounds. And I'm now down, I think I hover around 180, which I'm very comfortable with. When I met my present wife back in 1998, I was 175. So not too bad, not too bad. But the other aspect of it too, and I want to talk about this, is this concept of normalcy, or when they talk about the average, or the average statistical information. People who are a certain height should be a certain weight. And this kind of comes up when we start talking about the physical body. Well, how do we know that this person, maybe they really are big bone? You've heard that before, I'm sure. I'm just big boned. How do we balance the statistical information, with the individual's information, shall we say?
Yes, and yes, I live in the South. I've heard the term I'm big boned. But the reality of that is, even when we use like these weight scales that take into account body frame,
Mm-hmm.
and going by your wrist, which usually has the least amount of fat on it, to see what someone's body frame is. I mean, we're talking about maybe a 10-pound difference between small, medium, and large. So we're not, big bone does not mean an extra 50 pounds of grace. We're talking a very small amount of an extra bone mass related to that.
Mm.
For some people of different, same height, different body frames. But for the most part, when we're looking at like the BMI, for the most part, is flawed because if you have someone who's a bodybuilder or someone who's lifting weights, who muscle does weigh more than fat. And so sometimes we have someone who technically has a high BMI because the number, but clinically has a very low body fat percentage
Mhm.
because they don't really have a lot of fat. Most of what I'm looking at is muscle. So we have to take those things into consideration. Really, it's the body fat percentage that is more of an issue. When people get older, they tend to gain more weight in their visceral areas around their stomach, the girth around their belly area. And we're finding that that has more of a concern with overall cardiovascular health and as well as more of a concern with things like cancer and inflammatory rates and insulin resistance. And so those are the things that we tend to take a look at. When if someone comes in and they say, like you were saying, I hit 200 pounds and, that's not my normal weight or that's above my BMI. Those are the things I start looking at. What is the body fat percentage? What are your levels? What are your cholesterol levels? And your A1C or your fasting glucose levels? What are some of these things doing? Because what those things doing give me more information about your overall health than just that number on the scale. I have some people who are extraordinarily skinny, but they're skinny fat. So they weigh 120 pounds, but their body fat percentage is extraordinarily high, which then means they have high blood pressure, they have high cholesterol. However, physically, they can fit into a size 6. And then I have other people who are fitting in size 18s, but they're people who are lifting weights and they are doing all of their jogging marathons and they're doing all of this other stuff and their blood pressure is great and their cholesterol is great. And size wise, they're bigger, but clinically, they're actually healthier sometimes than other people.
Mm. We are talking here about resting, and we're talking about sacred rest. And I want to touch on that as we continue here with Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, and it's such a pleasure to have Dr. Saundra with us here on the program to talk about sacred rest, recover your life, renew your energy, restore your sanity. Yes, we're all going crazy because of the overweight information age. It's really overweight, especially with garbage. Okay, so it apply. These terms still apply in that context too, in my opinion. But what do you mean? I know what rest is, and we're not necessarily talking about sleep, although that can be part of that too. But what do you mean by sacred rest? Are we talking about sitting in a pew in church and just kind of meditating and praying, or tell us what you mean by that?
Yeah. So in my book, Sacred Rest, it really boils down the research that I did over the past 10 years as it relates to what rest really is. And at the very core of it, most of us approach rest and sleep as if they're the same thing. And what our research showed was that you can break rest down into actually 7 different types of rest, or at least there were 7 that we came up with initially. And those 7 types of rest include physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, social, sensory, and creative. And what we found is most people, they say they're tired, but they don't actually know what kind of tired they are. So they do something that they feel is restful, like they may go on vacation or they may lay around and watch Netflix or whatever it is. And then the next morning, Monday, when they wake up to go to work, they're like, why am I still tired? Well, they did something that was restful, but did they get the type of rest they actually needed? Did they pour back in the place of their actual rest deficit? And so that's what the book dives into. And the term sacred rest really comes from there's a spiritual component. So in the book, I divided up in kind of the science and the spirituality of rest.
Mhm.
And so the first half of the book talks about all the science, the research, all of the ways of getting rest. And then the second half of the book pulls more on my faith and the spirituality of rest, because I feel like a big part of the reason we struggle with this is because we put more emphasis on the work And we have stopped seeing rest as something that is worthy of our attention. We have a great work ethic, but we have zero rest ethic. So we have people who have an imbalance in their work rest situation. So they tend to burn out, feel exhausted, get to the end of themselves. And if we start incorporating rest, giving it back its level of importance, we improve actually our productivity, we improve our happiness in the situation, we get back on track with a healthy work rest ratio.
Here's an interesting thing, and I've talked about this on this program a number of times. And I, okay, so I think it's important. Not everybody else will. And that is this, that when the influenza rolls around, and it does every year, although I suppose now it's more frequent than that, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, who knows. When I was a kid growing up, and I did get it a couple, 3 times, and my mother was not the type to have us run out and get flu shots. She was not an anti-vaxxer by any means, but she was of the philosophy that you need to let your body, the immune system, you need to let it fight off these things. It won't get stronger if you keep pumping in the antibiotics or you get the flu shot. And I'm not saying people shouldn't. This was just where my mother was at the time. And I remember the analogy was actually made comparing our immune systems to our military, that if they don't practice constantly, then they're not going to be very good out in the field if they do have to go into combat. And so I find that we do have a lot of great things that help us to get through, but by the same time, there's an unintended consequence that it weakens our immune system. Talk to us a little bit about that. Then I want to get back into the sacred rest and especially in terms of restoring our sanity.
Yeah, so I 100% agree with that analogy about the immune system as it relates to the military. It does have to have a time to practice. And so rest is one of those times when your cells within your body, there's different, we all know this, there's different blood cells within your body that aid to the fighting off, that have like different positions within the military, so to speak. And so it takes time for some of these cells to rejuvenate and to stay at a high level of functionality. And so when we are in different stages of our sleep cycle, particularly stage 3 and beyond of non-REM sleep, that higher level of high quality sleep, the deep sleep that actually is restorative, that's when most of these cells get rejuvenated and kind of get rebirthed within your body, released within your body. And so we have to realize that things that increase our stress level weaken our immune system. So high stress jobs, whenever you are staying up late at night, if you're a student or someone who's just a night owl, and you're staying up late and you're only getting a couple of hours of sleep, and the couple of hours you're getting are light sleep, it's not actually deep high quality sleep, all of those things are going to weaken your immune system over time. So we have to be aware that the immune system does require some attention. And then, we live in a world where most of us eat not so great. So we're not getting adequate levels of vitamin C or zinc.
Yeah, you can say it. We eat crap. Okay. Okay. Some of us just eat garbage. Like I said before, the comparison between information and the human body, and it's unfortunate too. But I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just thought, we need to emphasize that it's out there and we need to be aware of it. And we'll get into another area of our intuition. Also, I want to talk about that, but please continue.
No, but that's exactly right. The stuff that we're eating just doesn't have high levels of vitamin C and zinc and some of the other things that actually help your immune system function. And so because of that, and none of us want to pay $70 every month for vitamins necessarily, we get into situations where we have some deficiencies that keep us from actually having high functioning immune systems. I don't have anything against vaccines. I'm a physician. Obviously, we give vaccines. So I'm a traditional medicine physician, so we use all of the resources available to us. But I also am someone who believes that we over medicate sometimes different things. And I feel like we have to realize God gave us bodies that function extraordinarily well and that are geared toward healing. But it can only heal when it has what it needs to heal. So we then have to be aware of what some of these nutritional and other deficiencies are.
This particular pharmaceutical company does not have stock You can't go to work for it at large, and it requires a whole set of other ingredients in order for it to manufacture the drugs. I'll use that term that it manufactures, and it is the greatest pharmaceutical company on the planet, if not in the universe. It's the human body. And what you just said is so important to think about. If we don't put in the things that will allow our body's pharmacy to generate and create the chemistry that is needed to function optimally, well, then guess what? We get all those different kinds of conditions that you just mentioned. You talk about the 7 types. We'll talk about that as well. The 7 types of rest using the rest method, which is recognize your risk, evaluate your current position, science and research. Oh, there's a touchy one. And then today's applications. So I'm going to use myself as the example, and I'm going to violate the HIPAA law by talking about my medical condition, which I've been talking about for years on this program. It's no secret. I was diagnosed back in 2020 with type 2 diabetes. Now, the way that I understand this, we all have the potentiality for a myriad of different things, including cancer and heart disease and diabetes, and the list goes on. Doesn't mean we're going to get it. But if we put into our bodies those things that trigger that potentiality, bingo. So I'm diagnosed. Now, this. I'm going to give you some numbers. When they ran the blood and they gave me my A1C, actually, they did a blood test on the 24th of July, 2020. And I was at, I know you're sitting down, 545. My A1C was at 11.3. The doc tells me, and this is another area too that we'll talk about. The doc says, Richard, it's going to be a long, hard road. And I said, no, it's not. I said, I know how I got here. We had just been shut down in March. And what did everybody turn to eat? Comfort foods. What are in comfort foods? Carbs and sugars, and carbs turn to sugar. And I had just, believe it or not, I had just had 2 Coca-Colas the night before. So it's no surprise that my blood sugar was so high. I got my blood sugar down to normal in a month and a half. Okay. Now, I did take the metformin for 1 week, and then I cut it back by 1 tablet because I noticed the numbers were coming down. I was monitoring, and they were continuing to come down. So it wasn't until the following November with my next checkup. He was really surprised but pleased. And he says, go ahead and back it off to 1, because I was taking 2 at the time. And I stopped taking the 1, and my numbers still stayed normal. And I was fine until 2023 March, when my father passed away. Now, here's an area I want to talk about as we get going here, because I don't want to forget about intuition and all those other areas as well. But I tried to explain to my doctor through some research that I had been doing that because of my father's passing, my body shifted back and I went back into type 2. In other words, my numbers went up. And of course, he's saying, okay, we need to get you back on the metformin, which I've done. Okay. And my numbers are okay. But he refuses to recognize that external conditions or stimuli affect the internal functioning of the body that could have exacerbated or brought me back from the potentiality to the reality of. Can you address that in a general sense, not that specific example, but in a general sense that doctors are great. They serve a purpose for us in our lives, but it's not up to them. It's up to us to take responsibility.
Oh, absolutely. Every every person really should be aware of not only their conditions, but do their own research and think outside of the box. I'm an internal medicine physician, so I'm trained in something very specific. And as an internist, we're considered primary care physicians, meaning I have a large span of knowledge over a whole lot of things. But then when there's something very specific, I need to refer patients to a specialist. And so, regardless of if you're seeing a specialist or a primary care physician, they are still human. They have limitations.
Mhm.
And so, yes, you have to have someone that you trust and you have some level of faith in, but you still need to be aware that ultimately you are the person who is going to live or die based on those results. And so, to be able to take some level of responsibility into saying, let me research things a little bit. Oh, my doctor gave me this medicine. Let me go take a look and see what some of the side effects could be. Especially if you're feeling some kind of way and you're like, I don't know if this is making me feel better or worse. Or if you notice that something's changed and you're like, I don't know if that was the right decision for me, or maybe I want a second opinion on something. You have to be aware of when things don't feel right. I
Mhm.
feel like we all have the ability, you mentioned intuition, we all have the ability to know our bodies. We have just trained ourselves to ignore our bodies. You get a ache, you get a pain, you're like, oh, I got to finish this job, I got to finish doing this, I'm busy, I got to do these things, and we ignore stuff. I find when people come in and I ask, how long have you had that chest pain? How long have you had that belly ache? How long they're like, "Oh, but I thought it was heartburn," or "Oh, I thought it was gas," or whatever it is they think it is. It's like your body's been talking to you all this time. The cancer didn't just pop up. It was there when you thought it was gas. You just ignored it rather than taking some initiative and say, "Hey, something doesn't feel right."
We are talking with Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith about sacred rest. Recover your life, renew your energy, and restore your sanity as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, along with Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith, and we want to give you a website, drdaltonsmith.com. We'll be linked to that website, Doctor, so that people can find out more about you, the work you're doing, as well as the book Sacred Rest. And I want to talk a little bit about intuition. I know you touched upon it a little bit. It's a big deal on this program because I've been promoting since September of 2019 that people participate in what I called the year of perfect vision 2020. When that went by the wayside, I said the decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to spend time going within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still small voice. And it's one of those things that a lot of people don't have a lot of practice in. Is that part of the the steps, if you will, the the seven types, if you will, of rest that we need to listen to, not just that still small voice, but also because I think it's a big part. They're integrated to listen to our bodies as well.
Absolutely. You mentioned the rest method, and a big part of that rest method is kind of being intuitive and aware and recognizing where you're at in each of these levels, all of those seven types of rest, which buckets are feeling depleted, which buckets are doing well. We have an assessment because a lot of people struggle with intuition. And so we do have an assessment at restquiz.com for people who are like, no, just give me the answer, doc. Tell me, tell me which type of rest I need most so I can start working on it. But that's not really the goal. The goal is to help you identify and then to become more aware of how to determine which of these seven you're needing to put your attention and focus on. So that when you go do restorative activities and practices, you're doing the ones that are actually going to most benefit you in those situations. I mentioned the book is divided up into two sections, the first half being the types of rest and the science. The second half is all about the spirituality part of it. And that's where we really go deeper into the kind of the intuitive aspect of rest, things like boundaries, things like the benefit of reflection, the freedom that comes when you actually recognize that you don't always have to be doing. That there is benefit in simply just taking time and away and to break and to pause. And so it's twofold, this conversation on rest. I feel like too often we only think about kind of the physical and the types of rest that are just easier for us to describe scientifically, but there is a spiritual component to it. As you mentioned, that still small voice type aspect of it that has great benefit for people, and I call it the gifts of rest, that has great benefits, but it takes practice. Sort of like that immune system analogy you gave. It takes practice. You don't just wake up. Let me give an example. I had a patient once who had literally had seen God knows how many doctors before she showed up to me, and she showed up so critical. She was like, I'm here because I someone said you might be able to help, but I've seen, and she named all these big name doctors, and she's like, nobody listens to me. Nobody knows what's going on with me. I know something's wrong with me. And I got all the I'm under the limitations of insurance like every other physician. If you've had 20 doctors and they've all done tests, I have to get results of those 20 tests before I can order anything else. I'm looking at this mammoth amount of testing. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of testing, everything completely negative. And I told her, I said, I just need to draw a couple more blood tests. And she's like, what else is there that could possibly be drawn? And what I noticed was she had all these blood tests, but she had no test of her actual vitamin levels, like B12, iron, vitamin D, none of these other testing that we can do. And so I ordered some of these tests, and honestly, my intuition was telling me this is something very simple to fix. Her intuition was telling her something is very wrong. Both of us were right. Her vitamin D level was non existent. I mean, it was the lowest I'd ever seen of any person ever. And these are tests that I tend to detect pretty frequently. And when I started replacing vitamin D, get this, this was something we bought over the counter.
Mhm.
As we started replacing that, this woman turned into a whole different person. Her entire energy level changed, her mood changed. It was like a Jekyll and Hyde experience. Now, some people could say, oh, well, that was probably placebo effect. Well, if it was, thank God it changed her life. But also her vitamin D levels went back to normal. And as we know now, things related to even like heart disease and inflammatory response, we're seeing now that vitamin D has a big role into that. This was 20 years ago that I had that experience. She was one of my very first patients. And it was one of the things that showed me that as a physician, I also have intuition about what's wrong with people. And I need to be open to be able to step into that. And I
Mhm.
think we need to stop ignoring the fact that there is infinite wisdom that's available to us, but we have to practice that.
Yeah, that is true. It is available to us. We, talk about this on the program on a regular basis with folks and with our guests. And the wisdom that is available is priceless. And it is very specific for the individual who is seeking out that. It's not for me to give to you because it's not. I mean, my intuition, my still small voice. That's why I always found it so fascinating when I worked back in Phoenix for Christian Station, where they would say, "And God told me to tell you." It's like, hold it, hold it. I have a direct line. He can call me collect. Okay, all right, I'll take the call. He, she, what have you. And it's just funny how a lot of people they want to share this. And again, I'm not going to discount anybody's impressions. My wife is very empathic, for example, and that's one of those things that is a challenge for her because she doesn't know how to protect herself from the onslaught of stuff coming in, and then she thinks it's hers. It's like it's not yours. That belongs to somebody else, and we need to figure out who it belongs to and give it back to them. Because it causes her a great deal of distress. I'm the
Yeah.
one who is more anchored, I guess you'd say, to where I, I listen to my intuition. I follow the promptings, but it's not to that level that she is. Do you find that, especially with your patients, female patients in particular, that they do experience this empathetic aspect to them, but because they've not really been taught about it, maybe they even think there's something wrong with them, that they ignore it, they discount it, and they try to, in some cases, even shut it down.
Yes, I do a lot of coaching and training and things with women, it's particularly women leaders who are experiencing what we call an emotional rest deficit. This is one of the things that pops up quite often with people who are empathic in that they experience emotions, but they don't know how to process through them necessarily, and they don't know how to be restored after having processed through them. So people who do have, because there's so many different levels to that, We have people who are empathic. We have people who consider themselves HSPs or highly sensitive persons. We have neurodivergencies of all sorts, including ADD and ADHD. And all of these things have an effect in how these different 7 types of recs affect us. And so for people who have a tendency to be empathic or consider themselves HSPs, of which I am both, you feel things different than other people. I feel sorrow when I walk into a room. I know when someone's scared before they even open their mouth. I can tell when a patient's anxious without them saying a word. So these are things that have, and I talk about it, and my friend wrote a book called Sensitive Yet Strong, because we sometimes feel like people who have that type of sensitivity or empathic pull are weaker. And I once had a professor when I was in residency actually pick up on the fact that I was able to pick up on those things and called me out in the middle of all of my peers and said, "How did you know to do XYZ with that particular person?" And when I started to describe what I saw and what made me know that this person was never going to voice the question that was in her head, he then said, "That is something I can't teach you," speaking to everyone, all the other my colleagues in medicine. He said, "That is the aspect of medicine I can't teach you. Some people will just get that, and those are the people who are going to find that they have deeper relationships with their patients and tend to cure things other people can't see because they're seeing what other people can't see." And so it was one of those interesting experiences because it let me know that when I feel that, I can better serve my patients by being attuned to my intuitive nature.
Mm.
When I try to fight that and try to logic everything out, yes, I'm going to go check things. Yes, I'm not going to just go off intuition automatically and give you a medicine. Oh, I think you've got this. I'm going to do the tests related to that to confirm it. But oftentimes it helps me narrow down my focus so I'm not searching in the wind for
Mm.
everything. I have a very kind of focused approach on how I'm going after stuff. And I think when you have someone who, whether it's someone who identifies as being empathic, we have to recognize that emotions are just as equally draining as physical stressors. And
Yeah.
so when you are empathic and you're taking on the emotions of others, you have to find, how do you get emotional rest? How do you release that so that it doesn't become a burden to you?
We're talking with Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith about sacred rest, and we're doing just that here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, and this is a program that talks about new paradigms for a new world, giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. I want to talk a little bit now about this aspect of faith, your faith, but faith in general that we all have. There are those who, and as I said, I worked for 15 years for Christian Station, so I've seen a lot of stuff. There's a part of me that feels like I should have some kind of a PhD in philosophical studies or something like that. But one of the things that I thought was real interesting, there were some people on that station, programmers, they were ministers, pastors, etc., that would actually say, if you don't have your healing, then you don't have enough faith. All right, that was one area. There's another sect that believes that no, we don't take our family members, our children, our spouses to doctors. There's another that says no transfusions, no blood transfusions, and the list goes on of the things that certain philosophies will not do because it violates some perceived edict or commandment or law or something along those lines. How do you balance your faith, your trust? And I think about when Jesus was speaking to his disciples, when they were all worried about what they were going to wear and what they were going to eat and where they were going to sleep, et cetera, et cetera. And he gave the message about the birds and the lilies of the field and so forth. How do you keep a balance between trusting in the divine and going to another human being for for help? We'll put it that way.
Yeah, I think we do need people in our lives. I think that Community and relationships are important, but I think that relationships go both ways. When I talk about spiritual rest, I'm not necessarily talking about um, going to church or reading your Bible. All of those can be part of it. But really, for me, spiritual rest it goes back to the scripture, of which the entire book was kind of birthed within me from Isaiah 30, chapter 30, verse 15. And returning in rest shall you be saved, and quietness and trust shall be your strength. And I love the last sentence of that. It says, but you would have none of it. And I feel like for a lot of us, that's kind of the relationship we have to rebuild, that relationship of trust of whatever the faith system that we're trusting in, and getting back to a place where we understand that there's a surrender aspect of that. You don't have all the answers, you don't know all of the details, and that's where the faith comes in at. If you had all the science facts that you could like check the boxes and I have definitive proof that this is the one God, or this is the one I should serve. If you had definitive proof, we've rotated right out of faith into something else. So I think it's that aspect of trust and surrender that is a big part of it. But then with that, I think we do need to have some level of community or people that we can discuss kind of our process with. Not that we're going to them for answers or going to them to be our in between with whatever our faith system is or our deity that we uphold, but that we have people that we can actually process life together with. I feel like oftentimes, right now we talk about there's an isolation or loneliness epidemic that's going on. And I feel like sometimes we fear because of political things, because of different, even within Christianity, there's 100 different versions of it. So who's
Yeah.
right? What do you go to church on Saturday? Or you go to church on Sunday? Do you speak in tongues or you're not speaking tongues? Do you lay hands on the sick or you not lay hands on the sick? I mean, we're divided up in a bazillion different ways depending on what you believe. And I think you have to have opportunities where there are people who believe as you believe, where you can just be free to say how you're feeling within your faith. For
Mm.
example, too often I find, like you mentioned, someone will come to me as their physician and they'll say, I might tell them, I literally, example just popped up in my brain, a woman who we diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And I said, hey, we caught this early enough. We could get, there's this great surgeon and we can do this and we can do that. And, maybe we can have a really long, lifespan, considering this is a pretty horrific cancer, but we can have a really good experience with this. We can actually get 5, 6, 7 years instead of like 2 months. And she was like, my God will heal me.
Mm.
And I thought to myself, the fact I found a cancer this tiny, which normally would not be found,
Yeah.
and I found it because I felt like something was saying there is something going on, in your GI tract. I think God sent me to help you find this. It's like
Yeah.
we have this idea of where God enters the conversation,
Yeah.
and I think sometimes we fail to see that sometimes God enters the conversations through people who are willing to be intuitive or willing to be sensitive to the still small voice. And maybe that I'm not God, but maybe I am God sent in that moment to just help you see something and to bring light to something. And so she died young. She died young, long before she should have ever died because she refused to. And no matter how sick she got, every time we were in the hospital, my God's going to heal me. And I'm thinking, he tried. He tried to heal you. You're wanting it your way. You're wanting the miraculous healing
Yeah.
where who says he didn't want to do it a different way?
Yeah.
He works in science just as much as he works in the miraculous. And so I think it's difficult sometimes for people to realize that God can still be God, even if he doesn't boom it from the heavens and zip the cancer out of your belly overnight, or whatever imagery we have on what the miracle will look like. Sometimes the miracle is the surgery worked.
It raises an interesting perspective to healing. I happen to be a Reiki master, and when my wife and I went through our training, they told us that when you send out the energy, if you will, you're a conduit, number one. But number two, you do not control what that is going to do for the person or circumstance that you are sending it out to. And I've told the story of my uncle, my father's brother, who had cancer. And after our training, we wanted to send him an absentee healing. They gave us his picture and we sent it. Well, at the funeral, my mother told me what happened and so forth. And then it got me to questioning, well, then what the heck is healing? Now, we didn't send it to heal him of the cancer. We sent it for him to do with it what he will. And my wife's nephew just passed away just before Christmas 2024. And you know how people will say if someone dies of cancer, well, they lost their fight.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's the interesting twist on that. No, they didn't. You are going to win if it goes into remission and goes away, or you are going to win if you're freed from that body. Yeah, we're going to miss you. Absolutely. We're going to shed tears, et cetera, but you're free. Either way, you are free. My wife in 2001 had a rare form of fallopian tube cancer. Went through all the processes, chemo and so forth, which I would not wish on my worst enemy. And she's been free and clear of it ever since. And so she, if you want to put it that way, won. But the reality is, as my father always told me, he said, eat, drink, and be merry in moderation because nobody gets out of this world alive. And that's the reality of this world. Do you think that that's also a bit of a problem with our medical community that actually doesn't give us the kind of rest as we are getting ready to depart, that they look at death and dying as, oh, we can't talk about that. There was a beautiful story that Dr. Leo Buscaglia told of his mother when she was in the hospital, and all the families there, and they're over in the corner away from the bed, and they're whispering, talking. And she yells out, "What are you whispering for? I'm still alive." And she calls Leo over and says, "Leo, you need to let go. You need to let go. It's okay. This is just the way, this is the process," and so forth. And I remember when my father passed 2 years ago, and I was here in Santa Barbara. Of course, he and my mother and family were in Phoenix. I was lucky enough, my wife and I were lucky enough to talk to him the night before he passed away. We got video. We didn't get to record the video, but it was a video call. So I got to see him. He was very coherent, told me he loved me. He was proud of us for what we'd accomplished, on and on and on. And of course, I found out, of course, the next day that he'd passed. I flew back for the memorial and everything. And I had a moment of the sobbing. I mean, just, that sobbing, missing of a loved one, be it a parent or a sibling or what have you. I had my best friend who died May 1st, 2 years ago. He was my best friend for 53 years. We went through grade school, high school, and college together. I haven't cried over him yet because every time I think about him, I laugh because we had so much fun together. Do you think that our medical community, let alone our society, still hasn't broken through to say it's okay to feel what you're feeling when someone dies? It's okay to let the kids see what's going on. My parents did that with my grandmother on my mother's side. My grandmother died in our home in Phoenix, and we went through that whole process. Talk to us a little bit about that before we wrap things up here.
Yeah, I think it's beyond the medical community. I think it's just as a culture as a whole, we have a fear of death and we don't discuss it or process it in such a way that we can get to a peace about the process of death and dying. Within the medical community, because we see it so often, death is one of those things where you learn to respect it. You realize all of us are going to die. You see it with COVID. You saw it within your colleagues. We're, literally ventilating our fellow physicians at the bed next door. So we have we have a relationship, I should probably say, with the process of death, that it's always in front of us. However, I feel like with the general population, it's like this hush hush situation. We're not going to talk about death. We're going to pray it doesn't come to us. You know, we're going to act like we can skip it some type of way. And I feel like it just creates an unnecessary fear. A lot of people are struggling with faith, and, is there a God? Is there not a God? Which God is it? If there is a God, there's a lot of faith struggles out there. And because we kind of bypass the faith struggle, we have a lot of people that then have a lot of death struggle because they don't have any kind of undergirding on what that even means. And there's just this underlying fear about death in general. I think one of the healthiest things for people to do is to start understanding that it's death and life are part of the same situation. They go hand in hand. You don't fear life, don't fear death. We have to get to a place where we see death as part of the continuation. And if you're fearing death, why are you fearing it? What is it that you need to work out in your understanding of it, or even just your processing of faith and how it relates to that, so that you get to a place of peace with it? Yes, you're going to be sad. Grief is real. Grief has waves. It comes and goes. People are going to be sad. They're going to cry. Even if someone, is the pastor or whatever, the highest, a priest or rabbi or whatever the highest position you think is, within, your religion, their family's going to cry, even though they probably know where they think that person's going, because grief is real. Our hearts, our emotions, all of those internal feelings have to be processed through. But we don't have to get into a place where we are trying to avoid death, not letting children see us cry, not letting people see us processing through some of that. I feel like that's done really our culture a disservice.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more in that respect. It's one of those aspects that they talk about. I mean, we were started talking about this. Of course, the two things in the Bible that I go to quite often are where Paul says, "It is appointed to every man once to die, then the judgment." So the next question I have is, so what was wrong with Lazarus? Was he really dead? Or was he an exception to the rule? And are there other exceptions to the rule? Because you hear about near-death experiences, people seeing the white light, people seeing their bodies as they're hovering over the bed where they're laying, and so on and so forth. And the other aspect of it is death is not the end any more than birth is the beginning, because we're immortal. It's also said too in the scriptures that God knew us before we were born, right? That's either implying that he knew us before we were born, i.e., because he's omnipotent. He can see into the future. God can see into the future. And that's how he knew us. Or that we existed before we came into human form, which means that which animates us is immortal. That soul, that spirit. I don't know if you've ever seen anything like this. I saw a documentary on death. They got permission from the family to take their terminally ill family member because what they wanted to do was they wanted to see what changes took place at the moment of death. And one of the changes, they had them on this metal table. The person was comfortable and so forth, but they had them on this metal table. It was a scale. And when the breath left the body lost, even if it was just ounces, lost ounces from the body. And it's just like nothing has left the table. So where did that weight go? And what was it? And because I think they were also trying to figure out whether or not, if we have a soul, if there's any weight to it, if there's any substance to it, and so forth. I don't know. And I'm not sure what that really proved, but it was it was an interesting program dealing with the subject of death and dealing with it. In the same documentary, they went into I want to say it was an African tribe, and they were there watching the community grieve, where they prepared the body and so on and so forth. They were then asked, they and their camera crew, to leave. We'll come get you, but you have to leave now because it's going to get dangerous for you. And apparently, they get very physical, maybe destructive in some fashion, what have you. Uh, and then, of course, they were brought back to continue filming and covering the process. And I thought, oh, boy, what a beautiful thing. When we were in Ireland, a dear friend, well, after we had left, we found out a dear friend of ours passed away, and they were talking about the wake where the body lays in the home in open casket. I don't know for how many days. I don't know if it's a week, that kind of thing. It's like saying, hey, this person died. You can come and say your goodbyes if you wish, cry, laugh, whatever, say whatever words you want, and so on and so forth. I have to say, I don't know about you, but for me and my father, when he passed, I was so grateful that I am able to say, even to this day, that when he left, we were good. There was nothing left unsaid. I know that a lot of people struggle with that. Can you share with us your experiences in terms of your own, if you don't mind? You don't have
Yeah.
to. Your experiences in that regard, and then we'll kind of wrap things up here.
Yeah, I have a similar experience to you. My father died very unexpectedly at the first of the year around 2021. And it was one of those situations where we'd spoken the night before, we spoke quite frequently. And so we'd spoken the night before, and it's like, I'll talk to you tomorrow, and, our normal conversation. And that next day never came, but I never felt like I missed anything. I felt like every time we spoke with a conclusion to it. And so there was always that sense of love. That was always that sense of our relationship is whole. I didn't feel like it was broken and fragmented. And I think that's something that all of us can kind of take with us in our day to day. I love that, the scripture talks about not going to sleep with, when you're angry at someone, to resolve things before you go to sleep, because we
Mhm.
never know when any of us are not going to wake back up again. And so to make sure that you live a life of resolution. You live a life where you say the things that need to be said. You don't drag over grudges and things, into the next day. And you don't kind of let anger persist and kind of infiltrate your life within your family, the people that you love, the people that would be hurt if you died and they felt like they didn't say something that should have been said, or they let something linger. I oftentimes find, and I really feel like this is just the grace of God. And I'll conclude with this. I know you're trying to wrap up, but there, there's a patient once that I had who really just he was such a pillar of his family. He was like the matriarch of the entire family. Everybody depended on him. And I remember when he got to a place where he kind of got almost like into a coma, and his body was just dwindling every single day. I remember something that he told me when he was more in his right mind, that he just wanted to make sure that everybody was good before he left. And I started when we would go see him, I would pull on some of that intuition, as you state, kind of and part of my prayer would just be, God, if he could just wake up long enough to have a moment with his family.
Mhm.
And I remember sitting in the doctor's lounge, and the nurse calls and says, "Hey, Mr. So and so is awake. Mr. So and so is awake." And I'm like,
Wow.
and I call his wife and his kids and all of these people, and they're like, "Wow, God healed him." And I knew in the back of my mind, this was not a healing. This was like his moment to
Mm.
say what he needed to say to these people. And literally, he had 24 hours of he went from not being lucid to 24 hours of completely lucid, and died that night.
Mm.
And of course, the family's devastated. They thought he was healed. But I think that there are moments in each of our life that if we respect the fact that God doesn't want us to be traumatized by death either.
Yeah.
And so there's moments where if we enter into those processes of recognizing there's graceful ways that people, yes, there's traumatic ways people die, and I don't have all the answers, and I don't know how all of that stuff works, but there are also some really graceful ways that people die, where we see that there's opportunities for healing to occur, especially when families have been torn apart in different ways.
I feel the same way about my father in terms of that final conversation, but there was a conversation he and I had a year earlier at my sister's, his eldest daughter, my oldest sister's memorial. My brother and I had gotten into a car at my parents' townhouse to drive to the memorial. And I came back to their townhouse, but my brother stayed back at one of my sister's houses. And we're standing around the dining room table chatting away. My dad comes into the room and asks rather seriously, "Where's Michael? Where's Michael?" And my brother is the jokester, and he gets away with the jokes that I would never get away with. So I turned to him and said, "Well, Dad, I'm so sorry, but we had to sell him to put gas in the car." My dad was not happy. He says, "Look, when I have a question, I want an answer." I said, and I apologized for being flip, and I told him. And then later that evening, I'm making up the couch for bed because my brother got the spare room before I did, and he comes into the room, and I turn around, and he says, "I want to apologize for getting so upset earlier." And I turned to him. I put my hands on his shoulders, and I said, "Dad, I love you, and you will always be my dad, and we're good." And we hugged. I hugged him very gently. He was one of these elderly. He was 91 when he passed. He was one of these elderly who has a little crick in his upper back. He's kind of hunched over, little starting to go to the question mark. And so I hugged him gently, and we were good, and we always have been. And I was so grateful for that moment to have that with him, even though it was a year before his passing. And again, I always remember the things that he taught me, the things that he said, like eat, drink, and be merry in moderation, because nobody gets out of this world alive. And as far as the physical body is concerned, one final question on this subject. Do you think the medical community doesn't know when to say when?
I think they struggle with it to some degree. I think that's probably the hardest part of my job as an intern is I do ICU related medicine as well. And sometimes situations where people come in, sometimes it's the ER when someone comes in and you're trying to revive them. We all know that once we get past a certain point, you're basically reviving a vegetable.
Mhm.
But when it's a 20-year-old on the table, we don't want to stop. It's like we want to try everything we can hopefully try to bring that person back, because a part of us, I don't feel like people go into I don't think everybody goes into medicine for the right reasons, but I feel like the majority of people who go into medicine do so because they love life. They actually want to see people healthy, heal, and whole. And so there is this extra drive to fight for life. And so
Mhm.
I think sometimes it is important for those who are in the medical profession to just really just to be honest with family members. When someone comes in and they got a situation, if you're a surgeon and someone comes in and they got a situation that the likelihood of them coming out that's pretty slim. I believe in telling family members, we got about a 20% chance of this surgery working. We can do it, or for let's say chemotherapy, we got to I'm not God, but technically we have like a 15% chance or 30% chance or whatever of this chemotherapy solving this cancer. So do you want 6 months of chemotherapy hell, or do you want to die gracefully in your house with your family surrounded you, and it might just be 2 weeks? And let people make that decision for themselves, because yes, some people are going to say, I'll take whatever is thrown at me. I want to try to live as long as I can, and they still might just live 2 weeks with that chemotherapy. But I think we just have to give people that option to be able to just be truthful with them. We can't heal everybody. Everybody can't be healed with medicine alone. And so just to let people make some decisions for themselves on how they want to stay and how they want to go.
It's one of the reasons why I do like California's laws on departing, shall we say. And I think that it's a good thing. I really do. I think that it's a good thing to allow people that freedom. You were talking with Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan here on Tell Me Your Story with Dr. Saundra, and I want to thank you so much for joining us here on the program. It's been a pleasure. I'm looking forward to our continued conversations, and I hope that we get a chance to talk to you again very soon.
It's been great chatting with you. Thank you.
I do have three final questions that I ask all of my guests,
Okay.
and you're no exception to the rule. And the first of those three questions is, who is Saundra Dalton-Smith?
I am the mama of two of the most amazing young men. One goes to University of Alabama, the other one goes to Auburn University. So they are hardcore football rivals, and the wife of a man who has loved me for over 24 years.
What gets you up in the morning?
I feel like what gets me up in the morning is the drive to do what I feel like God put me on the earth to do. I feel like I am here to help people get to better levels of wholeness and wellness in their life.
And finally, what was your best day?
My best day is each day that I wake up in my right mind, able to able to understand that I am like alive and here and I have clarity. I have family members who have dealt with dementia, and I've seen that in my patients as well. And if you wake up and you know who you are and who the people are around you, it's a fantastic day.
Absolutely. Well, thank you once again for joining us here on the program. Get a copy of Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith's book, Sacred Rest. I think that's such a beautiful title. And thank you so much for being with us. And I thank you for being with us, listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, video cast, as I say at the end of every program, love to Lal. Jeanette, I am still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Smokey, I'll see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.